Thank you so much for joining us for this week's episode of Digital Dilemmas. This week we have Sam Wallace with us. She is a consultant who works in the technology sector, helping, I believe, helping people find the right job and also helping companies find the right people.
Digital Dilemmas is a Link Media original podcast.
And we are super thrilled to have you here with us today, Sam. Thank you.
No, my pleasure. I appreciate the opportunity and I'm excited to have the conversation.
Thanks.
Go
ahead, Amber. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say one of the things that Sam specializes in, which I'm really excited to talk about today, is AI, the search business, and diversity, especially female leadership, which I think is something.
You know how you can best help that? Not cut all the women off when they're talking. Just gonna throw that out there. Anyway, anywho, back to the ladies. Samantha, you sound British, but you are in California, yes?
I am in California. Yes, it's a nomadic journey. So I'm Canadian originally, from Yukon territories, Whitehorse, where nobody's from. And then in small places in Alberta for many years, and then to the UK, and then actually moved back to Canada in 2002. And then I've sort of been migrating south since then, San Francisco initially, and now Southern California, LA.
Lovely. Well, you and John can talk about the appeal of Southern California. He's definitely enamored with the weather and the what?
You can talk about your first few years in the UK.
Oh, yes. I lived in London till I was 6.
Oh, nice.
So yes, I had a very strong accent when I first moved back here, but lost it since.
Yeah. It happens. I feel like the same. I had a Canadian accent when I moved to England, and then got to England when I was like 11, and this happened.
Well, it was so funny because I remember saying to my parents, why was my British accent so strong if everybody at home didn't have one? And my mother was like, there's no way we can compete with, you're in school all day, you're around every single other person you're around talks that way. So it just happens.
Exactly.
So tell me a little bit about what you do.
Yeah. So John's point is absolutely right. Like data analytics, AI, search, and diversity. So I've been in executive search for longer than I really care to acknowledge. With a number of different firms. I did 12 years with one of the big Shrek firms, and then more recently moved into a boutique. So I'm now a partner with Wilton Bain, which is a boutique executive search firm. So most of my work is around retained search engagements where I am hired by a client, and they say, here's the problem we're solving. And I go to market to identify the leaders, the executives who can solve that problem, find that person. And the diversity piece is a really important one for me. I don't know the data on this, but if you look broadly at the executive search industry, particularly in tech, particularly in functional tech, you will find the demographic of the search industry is not enormously diverse. And our world is based on our networks and how we get to people. And so if you think that the search ecosystem is building their relationships over years and we are non-diverse, then we're almost perpetuating some of that imbalance. And so as a female partner, I spent a lot of time cultivating and trying to build my network with diverse executives so that when I get those searches, I'm like, oh, this is who I need to be connecting to, and sort of the spider web of relationships to try and promote diversity through the search work that I do.
That's so impressive. I really, I've been not the corporate world, but I started out as a journalist and then was in the nonprofit sector, and then sort of moved into healthcare exclusively. But it's a problem sort of across the board. And it's a problem on the board. Speaking literally, most of the boards that I have had experience with have been old straight white males predominantly. And so I think it's great that you're working to change that. One of the things you said triggered something for me that is something that comes up for me a lot with AI that I think about, because so I'm not a tech person. I don't, and
Right.
John, maybe you can speak to this more coherently as someone with a tech background, but one of the things that frightens me about AI, and not much does, I'm pretty,
Good with it.
yeah, I'm pretty good with it. I'm pretty pro, yeah, I see it as a tool. I see it as a good thing, but I do worry about how it teaches itself, how these large language models or what have you are teaching themselves, because we have, as a culture and as a world, but especially in America as a culture, such built-in sexism and racism and sort of this inherent bias. So if it's using us literally to teach itself, is it learning that along with everything else?
Yeah. I mean, my sense of that is it's absolutely a valid concern and question. And I think that as it's evolving, the awareness of what those biases may be is really coming to the forefront. And I think what we're seeing is a lot more around AI ethics and AI kind of management or compliance or diligence, because, the conversation was, if you look at the teams, and this is again, big brushstroke observation, but if you look at the people who built the original language models or built the original technology, they weren't necessarily a massively diverse community, and so they were creating it in a way that made sense to them but didn't necessarily have a diverse perspective. So I think it's a really valid concern, but I do believe that the way that the sort of innovation is building and the momentum that it's building at is that is absolutely front and center of it. Has to be managed, and we have to really think about how it's used so that it doesn't end up being implicitly biased.
Right. I do. From a layperson's point of view, I have seen that. I was around when the internet was created, because I'm 100 years old, and there was not the same. There were not the same conversations about ethics and regulations
Right.
and stuff happening sort of around that that watershed moment that I do see happening around AI today. Would you agree with that?
100%. And I think, John, the reason that we ended up getting connected in the first place was one of the female leaders that I work with, who is a leading voice in ethical AI. I think she connected us, and I think that it is a conversation that is happening more and more, and it's in the heart of governments. It's in the heart of the C-suite. I did a search for one of the big professional services companies about a year and a half, 2 years ago, building out their AI team. And one of the conversations we had is, do we put in an executive of AI? So we've got AI strategy, but next to them, do we put in an AI ethics leader or some such thing, so that conversation happens in parallel with the strategy for growth? And I think that's more and more frequent.
It's so interesting. Who put you guys in touch? How did you guys meet?
Was it Todd Grossman through somebody else?
Oh, was it Todd? Maybe it was Todd. Yeah, maybe it was Todd. That's right. I was thinking there's a woman called Kay, who I think we're both connected to, but maybe it was Todd that put us in touch.
Well, it could have been through Kay through Todd.
Yeah.
Right.
Todd is one of the best networking people I've ever met in my life.
Isn't he? Yeah, exactly.
Friend of the show. He's been on the show.
Oh, has he? Brilliant.
No, he hasn't been on the show.
Oh, he hasn't been on the show yet?
No, I
thought he was one of.
I talk to him every week.
We talk to him so much. I feel like he's been on the show.
Todd has been launching a new company this year, and we hope to have him on at the end of summer, early fall.
Oh, brilliant. Yeah, no,
you can talk about it. Yeah.
Very closely.
Yeah, Sam, Todd and I actually grew up in the same town, and we didn't know it till we met at a conference.
Oh, no way.
Yeah, we literally grew up 5 minutes from each other.
Amazing.
Isn't that funny?
That's amazing. Yeah.
It is.
Before I was with Wilton Bain, I was with another organization, and as we were looking at building our practice in the US, we worked with him as really that connector, because he's like, I can get you in the room. Once you're in the room, you do your thing, but I can get you in the room. And he's amazing.
He's the best. I just can't say enough good things about him.
But it's and maybe you can speak to this a little bit, what you say about being in the room, that
yes,
it matters. And I think as women, and again, broad brushstrokes, and I'm not, I don't want to perpetuate any stereotypes, but women are less likely to ask for the salary they deserve. They are less likely to ask for the promotion they deserve. They are less likely to reach out to their connections and ask to get into that, for invitations into the room. And I think that's something I'd love to see change, and something, whenever I have women coming up sort of under me or working for me on my team, I say, throw out that way of thinking,
Right.
because it makes a difference.
Yeah, it does. So we did a research, or was involved in a research project some years ago, where we looked at how many touch points does it take typically when you're running an executive search for diverse and or non-diverse candidates. And so the hypothetical is like, we are approaching people who are incredibly successful, happily employed, zero reason to be looking for another role. And whatever the search that we're taking to market is sufficiently compelling that they're like, okay, we'll have a conversation with you. For diverse candidates, it takes almost a third more interactions through an entire search process. And so the reason, once we had that data, I was like, this is really important, because imagine week one of a search. So we've signed off, we're good to be in the market, we can socialize the client. We go to market, and the non-diverse candidates get our messages, and they're like, oh no, I'm good, I'm happy in my role. Why would I take the time to have that conversation? Or I don't have the time to have that conversation because of whatever reasons. That's the diverse candidates who think like that. The non-diverse candidates are like, oh yeah, I'll pick up the phone. And so if you think about how a search works, if they put their hands up first, they'll be introduced first. And so then they are, 3 steps ahead before the non-diverse candidates have even had the first conversation in some instances. And so again, it's like, when you know this, you can change the way that you approach search, and you spend the time.
I love that. I read, and this was, I want to say 25 years ago, but I remember there was this study that looked at people asking for references for when they were applying for jobs.
Yeah.
And it broke down along gender lines, because the women were like terrified to ask for references because they didn't want to put anybody out. They didn't want to bother anybody. They were afraid it was an imposition. And the men, almost to a man, were like, what's the worst that can happen? They say no.
Right.
So what? What? And I've tried to apply that thinking to everything professional, across the professional board. If the worst that can happen is someone says no, go for it.
Right. Exactly. But that's stuff that we need to kind of get ingrained earlier in careers, in society in general. It's like, if you ask, what is the worst thing that can happen? You have to be able to feel confident and safe to have those conversations. And how do we create more of that?
Let me just share some optimistic points toward what you're just speaking of. So for example, right now, for the last 7 years, I left corporate America and came to the University of Connecticut, where I teach AI, ethics, social media, analytics, etc. The digital marketing space. 2 things jump out at me in the last 7 years, and Amber, you've heard me say this. My classes have gone from 70% male to 70% female. My advanced class of social analytics, where we do a lot of social listening, and we have real world clients, it's usually a class of roughly 10, has gone from, in year 1 and 2, 8 men, 2 women. The last year and a half, 100% female.
Really?
So I am seeing a shift where the younger and up and coming female digital marketing executives are more female.
Interesting.
And I asked the class, and I ask this every semester when I show up in class, and I'll ask it again in a month. So how come it's all female here? What's going on? Where are all the guys? And we're all close enough where they're very open. And they'll say, and this is fascinating, they say, well, the guys are typically generalists right now. They don't want to work that hard because they know they don't have to. Wow.
Interesting.
Like almost quote, that's what they say. They don't have to work as hard. We know we do.
Wow.
I found that fascinating. So that's one thing. And they're not afraid the last couple years, 3 years, they're not afraid to ask for the job. They're not afraid to get as rejected anymore.
Yeah.
They might
Oh,
talk
I'm
to
sure your students are light years ahead of where I was,
yeah.
30 years ago when I was, or however many years ago when I was at that point. I do think it has come a long way
Mhm.
So I'm optimistic about down the
about the
road.
future. Yeah,
The-
for
you know, these
sure.
are 22 to 26-year-olds. When they become executives, that may be shifting, is what I'm sharing.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's fascinating data for sure to think that it's shifted that much. And I do think their fearlessness is awesome, but they're going to be facing people who
Yeah,
are
yeah.
not as kind of, I'm not sure of the word I'm looking for, but they're going into a world that is
Enlightened.
enlightened. Thank
Yeah,
you.
yeah.
But
Right.
they're having, the system is going to have to change. Like one of the things I was talking about some colleagues recently is like, you think of like the millennial generation coming in, right? They're leaders now, that the millennials are in leadership positions, and their style and their approach is different. And the thing is that the Gen Xers, who are sort of the senior leadership, it's that demographic that needs to change, because they're the ones that will be moving on, and this new kind of style is going to take hold. And so we have to sort of cultivate that to get to the future state that we want to get to.
100%. The other thing I noticed is when it comes to Amber, the point you made about inherent bias in AI, because I deal with AI ethics, and that's why
Mm.
I ended up meeting Sam. One of the things that we've been using in the classroom and I've been experimenting with the students is, and they come up with a lot of great ideas, is I ask them to write an opinion piece on something. Then I ask them to turn the nickel on it on the other side. Ask AI to analyze your bias.
Oh,
And that's an interesting experiment where they can see their own bias. And you're using AI to evaluate bias. So it's really an interesting experiment.
It's very meta.
yeah,
Yeah,
it is, isn't it?
right. And on the same topic, since like Sam, you were saying you might be recruiting an exec that has some AI ethics, maybe an AI ethics role at a company, or that's part of their role. The fact that we are now hiring people and
The fact that
uh,
that job exists.
the fact that the job exists tells me that it's a good thing we're looking at how AI has some bias, because we're looking in the mirror.
Right.
And that'll tell us a lot about ourselves, that we are all biased. We just don't know it sometimes.
Yeah.
And then we find out by evaluating AI, we're like, oh, wow, I didn't know that was a bias statement or a
Right.
bias argument.
Yeah.
And that can be a good thing down the road.
Have you tried different platforms to see whether they identify different biases within the same content?
Yeah, we typically use about 3 platforms, and they're all a little bit different with their biases. I don't
Mhm.
recall off the top of my head which is which.
Right.
And they're all a little bit different about saying no to answering your question. So there's a new thing with the AI tools that let's say you ask something politically.
Mhm.
The answer will be, I can't answer that.
I
And
can't, on every time you say that, all I can think of is 2001: A Space Odyssey, when the computer goes haywire and it's like, I'm sorry, Dave, I can't do that.
right. And I feel whenever that happens, it's a mental note, oh, this platform won't go down that road.
Right. Yeah.
And when I feel like writing, oh, I know you know the answer. You
You can tell me. You can
I
tell
Yeah,
can tell,
me.
right?
it's just
But
between us.
but so there's a couple things that their biases are a little different.
Mhm.
The answer is yes to that, and their refusal to answer certain topics is different.
Right. That's interesting. That's very interesting.
I actually thought it was so interesting. Was it Matthew, your colleague who teaches that writing course down at the
Yes.
Stanford? He was saying he found that in some cases the AI models had less bias than he would ask his students to write something and then would put the same query into, like a creative writing assignment, and then would put the same query into one of the chat GPTs of the world. And it was striking. Like he wouldn't even recognize the bias that was coming in from his students until he saw something that totally flipped it on its head and didn't assume that the speaker was the first person speaker was a white male or whatever, whatever it was, that there was actually less bias from the machine learning.
Yeah.
So Sam, in your role,
Mm.
changing gears a little bit here, are you using AI in your job
Mhm.
to find candidates? And can you share what you've learned from that experience if you are?
Yeah, no, I mean, the thing is, AI and the various tools are everywhere in recruitment and in search. I think in my world, in the executive search space, we use AI, I would say, more from a data, knowledge, speed perspective rather than a people perspective, because the way that we operate is once we've got an engagement, we'll look and we'll say, okay, what's the target universe? Who are the client organizations that would be complementary to our client? And so we use AI to help generate that ecosystem if we don't have it, and build that out. So we've got the kind of A-list targets, and then we might find B's and C's that the AI will actually identify for us and give us information about, so we know what the companies and what they do and where they're positioned. I don't use AI in terms of name generation necessarily. That's using all of the other platforms that are available to everybody. It's like our database, LinkedIn, Google, all of that, general searches. I think where AI is having a huge impact, though, in terms of talent acquisition, is the automation of resume reviews, which happens maybe with contingent firms and more with job postings, that AI is the first point of screening for individuals. And so I have a lot of conversations with people around how do we get past the AI screen to get to somebody who's going to be able to really understand the potential value proposition that I have, versus a checkbox of, do we have these keywords on my resume to get in the door? Like, I even was asked a question the other day of like, should I just copy and paste the job description in my resume so that will get me past the AI? And I was like, oh, I don't really think that's the right thing to do, but it's definitely kind of a
I have
gatekeeper.
seen that. I have seen that on like not the Muse. I don't want to pick out the Muse, but like on sites like that, career, they'll say, copy the job description and put it in white print
Right.
on the PDF so that it looks like a blank page.
Oh, and then
But it'll get screened by And I like, is that really what we've come to? Is that really the best way to
I
find
hope
the best
not.
people for the best jobs?
No. I would hope that's not the case. Yeah.
Go ahead,
Sorry.
Sam.
Go ahead.
I'm thinking this is interesting because I get asked this question. I typically, when I went to academia, and really I went there for one reason, to help students um, graduate. So I usually teach juniors and seniors and give them the real story of the real world, lend them my experience, be a mentor, and help them on their way out the door so that they have a softer landing when they get there. And the questions I get asked all the time is, what's the best way to find a job? And now that we have AI, they're a little bit concerned with, gee, how do I get seen? So, for example, I had one of my best students a year ago apply to NBC Sports for the Olympic coverage as an intern.
Yeah.
Which is being run out of Stamford, Connecticut, which we have one of our campuses is literally down the street from this entire Olympic experience. And perfect candidate. She couldn't figure out how to communicate her skill set properly to even get through the millions of people who are probably applying for Olympic internships this summer.
Yeah.
So I get asked all the time, how do I get seen? Well, how am I going to get through this AI world?
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's such an important question. I mean, I think, and this is from a search and recruiter perspective and wouldn't necessarily be for an intern position, but it's like, if you can figure out how you get on a recruiter's radar, then they are the people that should be, particularly for executives, they are the people that should be finding the next role for you, right? Because we're in the market every day, right? So we're hearing about what's
Right.
happening. We're advocating for our clients. And so it's when, if you create a way that your resume stands out to a recruiter and you build those relationships, then that is definitely additive. I don't think you can game AI. That's the thing though, right? I mean, if the system is set up so that AI is going to pre-screen for criteria A, B, C, if you know that, then you're just going to be kind of in a generic mix of everybody who has answered the same question in the same way. And so it's sort of like, how do you differentiate? And I think it's kind of, this sounds a bit old school, and I know we're kind of leaning into how we're using technology, but I think it is about the relationships and the network and how you cultivate that, in addition to thinking about how technology can advance and accelerate things.
Oh, that's a great point, because
sorry.
no, go ahead, Amber, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I really couldn't agree with that more. And I loved in all your answers, a word that keeps coming up is relationships.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't have relationships with AI. You have relationships with other people.
Right.
That, and I do think that's a component that is never going to be taken out of it. But the other component that I think is important, and this is my own bias because I work in communications, but is communicating.
Mm-hmm.
All of this data and all of this knowledge and all of this learning isn't going to help anybody unless it can be communicated properly. And that's still true. And that's true of people. Who you are and what you have to offer is never going to be seen unless you can learn to communicate it properly.
Yeah, exactly. I had a conversation with, he was the AI innovation executive for one of the big investment banks in New York. And he's like deeply technical. And we were sort of talking about elevator pitches, like how, when you've only got a really short period of time, how do you tell somebody what you do? Because if you say you're an AI innovation leader, it's kind of like, what does that mean? And he shared with me that in his earlier career, he used to be a translator at the United Nations. And so his early life was communicating effectively in different language so that people would understand each other. And he said, that's exactly what I do now, except instead of language, it is technology and it's AI. And I was like, oh, that's good. That's good. It's kind of really like, good. How is this technology communicating with us? How are we using it? How does it actually shape our future?
I love that.
That's really cool. And that's one of the things I am sharing with the next generation that enters the workspace is, I know they grew up on technology. I know they're
digital
really good,
natives.
right? Yes. But they're still learning how to develop human relationships.
Well, and COVID didn't help.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm not saying I blame them. I mean, we're all born into the world we're born into. I get it.
Yeah.
Oh no, I wasn't blaming anybody either. I think it was an interesting time to have sort of all face-to-face personal interactions shut down.
Yeah. For a long time. I think kids suffered. Not all. I think some came out of it, just fine. But I think it was definitely, it was hard, and it puts them behind a screen, and that's where there's a degree of comfort. But that's the future, right? And so we have to figure out how that is useful, usable, and allows growth for individuals, companies, society, in a good way.
So that perfect segue. You use the word future.
Yes.
So a couple topics there I'd love to hear your thoughts on are the future when it comes to working from home or in the workplace, the future of females in leadership roles, the future of AI intersecting all of this. Some anecdotes of what you're seeing out there or what you believe is going to happen. I would love to hear from you on those various topics.
Gosh, how long do we have? The remote working from home, working from the office, we see sort of missed shots at this so often, where there is this mandate. We saw one big tech company maybe 3 months ago who sent a global memo and said everybody has to be in 5 days a week. It's non-negotiable. And it's like, did we learn nothing from COVID, right? What we learned from COVID is that actually, when you empower people to do good work and you hold them accountable for doing good work, they can do that remotely. They can do that from anywhere. And being in an office doesn't necessarily improve that. I think where we've seen sort of the balance and the success, in my view, is this, I know it's kind of cliched language, but this idea of a hybrid model, right? But not a mandated hybrid. Like coming in for 3 days a week is not kind of flexible working. That is a mandated schedule. I think there's a balance between saying, come in, find the culture, find the growth of learning through other people, at the same time as hold yourself accountable for the performance of the work that you do. And I think companies that have found that balance are the ones that keep people moving forward successfully. And also recognize that going into the office is a time that you use differently, right? If I think about our world, all of our time in search is on a Zoom call, on a Teams call, talking to people. Like that's kind of the essence. That's what we do, really. We talk to other people. So when we go into the office, we're having these conversations, but everybody, instead of sitting at their desk, goes and finds a breakout room because they're having confidential conversations. They don't want to be loud and disruptive in the office. So it's kind of like you go into work to be with people, but then you put yourself in a little breakout room to do your job. Completely counterintuitive. Right. And so it's sort of thinking about using the workspace in a way which is like, if you're coming in, have a strategy meeting, do something
collaborative.
Yeah.
Do something where it's everybody's in the same room and you want that kind of magic.
Yeah, exactly. I think one of the challenges with this sort of whole DEI conversation is it's lost its shine, and that's a really, really unfortunate thing. Like the Human Resources Association, SHRMA in the US, has taken equity out of the DEI narrative that they use for whatever reason. And it's sort of like, we have to continue to be focused on this because it's not going to happen by accident. And we've seen statistically over the last 3 years that whilst it's only 0.5 percentage point or a percentage point, the actual number of female executives in the Fortune 500 is in decline. And it's not increasing, which we would believe that it is, because we've been kind of hearing this, having this conversation. It's been at the forefront and it's something that everybody's familiar with, but rhetoric doesn't get us there, and the action has to continue. We have to keep on pushing. And I think that we're at risk that is losing a little bit of momentum. We need to really stop it losing momentum and focus on how do we actually make it move forward.
Well, that's interesting because we've heard in the last 48 hours that the phrase DEI is going to be used in the US elections.
Right.
And that's right to your point. It's losing its shine on some of the population. And yeah, there's a lot, we could talk forever on that, but that I believe 100%. It won't happen by accident.
I love that phrase. That course that I took that I keep bringing up, John, I know in our conversations that we have at home, I took this course my senior year of college that was incredible about ethics in politics. And one of the things my professor said, he was this incredibly like wise man, and he said, it would be great to think, he was talking about disability access, like the American Disability Act, and making buildings accessible for people who have physical disabilities. And he said, it would be really nice and easy to think that, oh, the market will take care of this. It will, it'll happen on its own because people will want the business from, those who are differently abled. And so they will make their buildings accessible. And it doesn't. We've learned that it doesn't happen by accident. I love that. I want to put that like on the wall. It doesn't happen by accident. You have to make it happen.
Make it happen. Exactly.
Yeah, I learned that. Sam, I was at a class. Amber was with me. I was invited down to NYU in May. An AI ethics class similar to the one I teach at UConn was being taught at NYU, and they wanted me
to. It was at Columbia.
Excuse me, I'm sorry, at Columbia. I apologize. I was at Columbia University, and on the panel was an AI ethics advisor for a large financial institution. And to the point you're both have been making, when it came to AI ethical rules, AI ethical regulations, AI ethical boundaries for the finance space, clearly the answer spoken was, we will do whatever the letter of the law says. One step further, we have no interest in ever.
But But the flip side of that
There it
was,
is.
but he said we want to know what those regulations are because we don't want to be out there doing things that retroactively we are going to be in trouble for, that the SEC is going to come after us for doing something that we didn't know was against a law that what didn't exist yet.
Yeah.
That, and it was also clear that financial companies, and I am not a communist, I'm a capitalist, but like the financial companies they will go as far as they can
Mhm.
within the letter of the
And
law.
that's the point I'm making to Sam's point about this won't happen by accident. None
Yeah.
of these things that we want to do to make the world a better place in the workspace
Mhm.
is ever going to happen without
By
a law
accident.
or
No.
it's not none of it. None of the topics we're talking about. No one's going to
Do
wake
the
up one day
work.
and say, you know what, I think we should do blah blah blah.
Yeah, exactly. But I think what's so interesting about AI is that it's bandied around as a term that everybody seems to be fluent about, which clearly very few people actually
Right.
are.
Right.
It means lots of different things in lots of different environments.
Right.
And so I think that the desire to regulate is absolutely there, but the know-how as to what that needs to look like, nobody's exactly certain of because it's changing so quickly. I mean, I think when was it, like 6 months ago, there's all the sort of doom and fear that AI was going to destroy the world, and it's like, well, no, I spoke to somebody and they said it's information alchemy. That's what AI is basically, and it's just
Yeah.
kind of formatting information in different ways that we have previously not been able to. And as a result, we have to put some constraints on it, but they have to be fluid because in a year's time, what we're
It's going to be
able to
different. It's
do
going to
is
look
going to do
different.
exactly. And it's sort of that agility, which is sort of counterintuitive to governance and compliance, because that is, that's put a box around it and the job is done.
No, it happens in geological time, not like.
Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely 100%. It's moving too quickly for regulators or politicians or legislators to write something that is
Mhm.
not fluid because it will
Well,
change quickly.
and also to Sam's point, a lot of those legislators and regulators and, politicians are not digital natives, are the furthest thing from digital natives. It's like, you remember when they had that hearing on the social media companies and you were like tearing your hair out because
Yeah.
none of the people asking the questions, clearly, most of the people
Yeah, I
asking the
do.
questions weren't informed enough about the technology or the platform to ask a coherent
Yeah.
question.
No, my
Yeah.
students
And these
my
are the people making the
yeah.
decisions.
No, they to their credit, most of them have hired staff now that are their emerging tech advisors, so
Mhm.
they can at least spell social media or spell AI.
Yeah. Yeah.
But to create legislation really challenging. And most of the people, Sam, I've talked to globally are, the EU can do what it needs to do. That's great. The United States will be slow and they'll do what they
Mhm.
need to do in time. But most people have come to the place that you just shared. We
Mhm.
can't wait around for it. We're not counting on it. It's
Yeah.
a fluid situation. We'll do our best with the market will decide.
Yeah.
It's too fast, too fluid.
Yeah. I mean, I think the one thing that I do think is encouraging, and I was at a conference where, and I forget, gosh, I forget the executive's name. She's one of the AI ethics leaders at Google. And she said, we have conversations as executives within the big tech companies, and we're sharing thought leadership around how we should think about AI governance and AI kind of management. And I thought that was encouraging because it's sort of, there is a collaboration, there is a community that is thinking about this, even if it's not necessarily implemented in a kind of mandated governance way. It's a topic that I think is forefront of everybody's minds.
I think that
was on
is,
I'm sorry.
I was just gonna say, I think that is really encouraging. The wallpaper of my computer is power is gained by sharing knowledge, not hoarding it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, in corporate America, there has been traditionally a sort of hoarding culture. Like if we know something, it's gonna mean less if everybody else knows it too. And
Yeah.
I do think that's changing.
Mm-hmm.
I was on a webinar last night with uh, the ADL, the American the Defense League, and they were talking about this topic. And one of the gentlemen said something that applies to what Sam just said. And he said, I like to break companies up into two types. One is, and he was talking about social media platforms and AI companies. One is the groups that they're at least trying a little bit.
Mhm.
They have some rules, that you can't do stupid things like A, B, or C, even if they're not really good at it or enforcing it. They're trying. Then there's the other groups, and he mentioned X, that just don't care at all.
Mhm.
And he said that's the beginning point for him as an ethics, emerging tech ethics person, is to at least identify the companies that don't care at all.
Yeah.
And that those are the danger places.
Yeah.
Well, and also, like they say about, many things, awareness is the first step. Being aware that this is an issue, being aware that that the jobs that you're looking to fill and the connections you're trying to be aware that that's even a thing is the first step.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and if we bring it back to sort of recruiting and search, it's like if you're a candidate and you know that it's going to be an AI platform that's doing the assessment, you may approach the application or that search differently. If you're working with a search firm, you may approach that differently. And it's kind of, to your point, exactly. It's like if you have the awareness of the tools and the technology that's being engaged, then you can adapt a little bit more effectively.
And on that note, because we have gone a little bit over time. I'm sorry. I know everybody's time is valuable. And I'm dying to ask Sam about the Olympics because it's all I can think about. And with you coming from so many different countries, who are you even cheering for?
Oh my gosh, it's tricky. So I'm Canadian, English, live in the US. My sister lives in Sweden. My husband is Australian. So
you have a wide range of teams to root for.
Yeah, in fact, so it usually comes down to Canada and England. That
Interesting.
Sorry not to be supporting the US, but it's
no,
like,
that's okay. That's okay. That's okay.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Are you excited for the Olympics?
Absolutely.
I'm very amped up for the Olympics. I'm very into Snoop Dogg's coverage. I don't know how much of it you've seen, but it's worth catching.
It's worth it. 100%.
It's worth it.
He covered the US Olympic trials for NBC. We didn't know this. We just turned it on because we love sports, and we turned on the Olympic trials. And there he is in the infield of track and field
in his ABC suit. Like,
we were dying. We're like, what is going on here?
What's happening?
Right.
No, ABC was like, this is a good thing and we need to be on it. And to their credit, like,
yeah, do something different and see what works.
Exactly, and see what works. I love it.
I think it's a brilliant idea.
I love it.
And I know the opening ceremonies are taking place in a matter of minutes or hours. And the next 2 weeks, we'll be watching a lot of the Stamford, Connecticut broadcast-based Olympics.
This is your chance to brag. Earlier this morning, John was like, this is all happening in Connecticut. How come everybody's not bragging about it? And I was like, because we're from New England. And
I know, Sam, you must know this.
The Northeast.
If you're from New England, we don't
Puritan ethic. You don't brag about it.
We don't market it. We don't talk about
humble
ourselves.
Human beings. Humble.
Yeah, right. We're actually not, but we don't do a good job marketing. So.
Thank you so much for joining us today. There was a really interesting discussion, and it was so nice to meet you. I've heard a lot about you from John. So.
Oh, well, nice to meet you too, and I appreciate having the chat. It's good to get connected.
Sam, we'd love to have you back on later in the fall after the U.S. election as we get into the winter hiring cycle.
Yes, let's do it.
Okay, I love it. In the meantime, enjoy the rest of your summer. Enjoy the Olympics. And I hope you have a great time with your family over the next few weeks.
Likewise. Good to see you both. Thanks so much.
All right, Digital Dilemma fans, that wraps up another episode. Thanks for tuning in and navigating our tech world with us.
Please rate us and leave a review. And if you enjoyed it, tune in next time. We'd also love it if you would send us any questions or suggest guests via email. Thanks so much for listening, and we will see you next week.
Digital Dilemmas is a Link Media original podcast.